Hello everyone, my name is Satyam Raha and welcome to my channel. So in this video, I'm going to talk about a pattern which is a very basic one. Let's say I want to print a pattern like this. So if user gives 4, then these 4 lines should be printed. Okay, say the user provides 3, that is I want 3 lines of the pattern. So it should be like this. So 3 lines should be printed. Okay, so always in case of patterns, we will ask for input from the user, which will be the number of lines. Always. Okay, do not ever build a pattern which is hard coded. Do not do that. Okay, always take the number of lines from the user. So I hope you understood. So it is same as, say, I want to print star. So like this, right? If you can print one, you can also print star. It's the same pattern, right? So how should you approach when it comes to patterns, right? So you already know that patterns are the building blocks of logic building, right? If you want to write a program using your logic, then obviously you need to understand how to build your logic, right? And patterns are beautiful ways, beautiful programs which actually help you in your logic building, right? Let's see how. See, I cannot feed you a shortcut to write patterns. You can memorize the code, but that will not help you in future. What you can do is you can see my analogy, see how I think, right? I will go step by step, and maybe you can follow me. Okay, just follow the thinking process. That is the most important thing when it comes to logic building. So let's say I have this, I have this code, I have this pattern, right? So what is present here? You see, we have spaces here. How many spaces? 3 spaces in the first line, 2 spaces in the second line, and 1 space in the third line, and 0 space in the fourth line. So it makes it a square, right? Although we do not need the spaces, still for the next patterns, you should understand that we have to consider, or we need to consider, all of this stuff in the box, right? So you can see we have 4 lines here of the pattern, right? So in the first line, what is happening? You can see that only one value is printed. In the second line, 2 values are printed. In the third line, 3 values are printed. It can be star, it can be x, it can be 1, it can be anything. But how many elements are printed? You have to think. Forget about the spaces, because on the right side, if space is present, you can ignore it, right? If space is present on the left side, like you will see in the next patterns, that is important. But in this case, space is in the right side, and that makes it very easy. Okay, so it's the most easiest pattern, right? So you can see in the first line, we have only 1 element to be printed. On the second line, we have 2 elements to be printed. On the third line, we have 3 elements to be printed. And in the fourth line, we have 4 elements to be printed, and so on, right? And what is to be printed? A single digit. It can be star, it can be 1, it can be anything, right? So obviously you have to first make a building block when it comes to patterns. You have to write a for loop which actually runs through the number of lines, which will generate the number of lines. That is the first task which you should do closing your eyes. That's for sure which you need to do. Let's get it done. Okay, let's simply write a for loop. So for int I equals to, always it's better to start with 1. Okay, just for your understanding, if you make it start from 0, it will work fine, no issue. But with 1, it will be very easy for you. Okay, let's see how it's easy. So before that, let's take the number of lines as input. So I can take the number of lines as, say, int line equal to sc dot next int, isn't it? So I can simply take it here. Now I will run this loop for number of lines, right? So I less than equal to lines or line, right? And I plus plus. So what is the importance of this for loop? What is the importance? The importance is it will simply generate the skeleton of the pattern. That means when the user is providing 4 as a number of lines, that means you should at least print an empty blank or whatever you think, a skeleton of 4 lines. Next we'll think what we should put in those lines, right? But first of all, you have to at least print those lines. That is a skeleton, right? So with this loop, we have actually built the skeleton of the pattern, because this has to be done, right? I think you understood why I have to provide this loop, irrespective of anything, irrespective of what the pattern is. I don't care, but I have to provide this loop only to generate the number of lines in the pattern. Okay. Now my next question is, what should I print inside each line, or what should I do inside each line? You can think this loop will run for 4 times if the user inputs 4, right? So 4 times it will go on. So first time maybe say, okay, so first time for this line, second time for this line, third time for this line, and fourth time for this line, right? That is fine. But when you are in this line, that means you are in this iteration, in the first iteration, right? When you are in the first iteration, then what you should do? That is my question. Okay, when you are in the first iteration, then what you are going to do? You have to print one element, not one element. Okay, when you are in the second iteration of the loop, you have to print 2 elements. When you are in the third iteration of the loop, you have to print 3 elements. So obviously you can understand inside each line there is some pattern going on. In the first line it is 1 element, in the second line it is 2 elements, in the third line it is 3 elements, in the fourth line it is 4 elements, right? And when such a pattern is there, what can you do to solve that? Obviously inside each line you cannot write it manually, right? Like in the first line it is 1. You can see the relation of the number of lines and the number of elements. When it is line number 1, it is 1 element to be printed. When it is line number 2, it is 2 elements to be printed. When it is line number 3, it is 3 elements to be printed. When it is line number 4, you have to print 4 elements. So obviously you can see the correlation, right? When you can see such a correlation, what you can do is you can use this I. You can use this I, because this I is nothing but the line number, right? So you have got an idea that line number has something to do with number of elements in each line, isn't it? Line number means line number 1, line number 2, line number 3, line number 4, and it has got something to do with the number of elements in each line. It is directly proportional. If line number is 1, you have to print 1 element, irrespective of what the element is. It may be star, it may be 2, it may be 3, it may be 1. In this example, it is 1, right? But focus on the number of elements. So when it's line number 1, you have to print 1 element only. When it's line number 2, you have to print 2 elements only. When it is line number 3, you have to print 3 elements only. When it's line number 4, you have to print 4 elements only. Isn't it? You got a correlation. So what is this line number here in my program? It is the for loop which has the iterator I. So you can use this I inside this loop. You can use this I to correlate to what number of elements to be printed. So obviously you have to understand that just like the number of lines, the number of elements also needs a loop of its own, isn't it? Like what I said is, like the number of lines loop is I loop, right? The iterator I, this loop. So for line number or number of lines, we have used the for loop I. Obviously, for number of elements in each line, you again need another loop, isn't it? Because the number of elements is continuously increasing, right? So you need a loop for that, because you cannot manually print one element in the first line, two element in the second line, three element in the third line. Maybe for 1,000 line, what will you do? Will you write 1,000 once manually? No. Obviously, you will use a loop for each of the line. For each of the line, right? So when I say for each of the line, I have to run a for loop, or I have to print some number of elements. What do I mean is I have to use a nested loop. Okay. So obviously you can understand, for number of lines, we need one for loop, and that is the I loop I have already written. And for the number of elements in each line, again I need another loop, but that loop should be a nested loop. Nested means it should be inside this for loop I. Why is it so? Because for each of the line, I have to print the elements, and it is not independent of each other. They are dependent, because here you got the correlation. Line number 4 has to be of 4 elements, right? Line number 3 has to be of 3 elements. That means they are correlated. That means they are not independent of each other. And that means you have to use a nested for loop. Okay. So how can you use a nested for loop? Let's first write a simple loop. Okay. Let's first write a simple loop. Okay. So let's simply write for int j equals to, say, I'll start with 1, and j less than what? Now you will see, you can see here what I said. What did I say? I said line number 1, in line number 1, how many times this loop should go? 1 time, isn't it? Line number 1, only 1 time. This loop should go only 1 time. In line number 2, the loop should go 2 times. In line number 3, the loop should go 3 times. And in line number 4, the loop should go 4 times. And so on. In line number 5, the loop should run for 5 times. Now, what is this 5 time? Or what is this 4 time? What is this 3 time? It is nothing but the line number. Because this is line number 1, this is line number 2, this is line number 3, this is line number 4. Isn't it? So I can directly use this. How can I use this? I can directly use I. Now what did I do here? Don't get confused. What did I do here? What I did is, for each line, think of it, for each iteration of I loop, that is for each iteration of a line, some elements are printed, and how many times this loop is going to get executed? It's I times, which is the number of line, which is the line number, sorry, which is the line number. So in the first iteration, i's value will be 1, isn't it? And j will run how many times? J will run only 1 time, because j will be less than equal to 1 for only 1 time. In the second line, when I equals to 2, obviously in the second line, when it comes to second line, I will be equal to 2. Now j loop will run 2 times, isn't it? I think you are getting it. J loop will run for 2 times. And that is what we needed exactly, right? What we discussed here. When it is line number 2, the inner loop, the nested loop, should run for 2 times. That is I times, if I is the line number. Here 2 is the line number, so 2 times. Here 3 is the line number, so 3 times. 3 times the inner loop should execute, isn't it? So that is what I did here. And this is the basic structure or basic skeleton of the pattern, right? Now we, using the I loop, we are generating the number of lines. Using the j loop, we are generating how many element should we have, or how many times we should get or we should spend inside a line, to be very very abstract. Okay, I loop is, again I'll repeat, I loop is saying how many lines should be printed, and j loop is saying inside each line how many times should I say, should I stay, or how many times should I do some work. And here the work is to print the number of elements. So it is very easy. I will simply print what? Let me print 1. Okay, that's it. This task is very easy. If you want to print 1, so 1. If you want to print star, you can put a star. But this is very important, how many times you are going to run the loop, isn't it? But here, if I run the code, it will be a disaster. If I run this code, you see it's asking for input, say 5, and see it has printed how many ones. Just check it. If I want to see whether this is correct or not, whether they are printing the number of ones correct or not, let's see. This is for line number 1. Then line number 2 will have 2 ones. Line number 3 will have 3 ones. Line number 4 will have 4 ones, and line number 5 should have 5 ones. Yes, so it is printing correct number of elements. That is true, but we have to indent it. How can you indent it? Here I have used println. What it does is, after printing every one, it will print a new line. That is the task of println, right? And I don't want that. I want to print. Now if I execute the code, it will again be a disaster. So if I put 5, it will be once like this horizontally, because there is no new line. But when do I want a new line? This is also part of the pattern, very important. So I want a new line after one line has completed, isn't it? That means after each iteration of I loop, I have to print a new line. So after iteration of each I loop, that means here, right, after the j loop. So at this place, I'm going to print a new line. Okay, just like this. We don't need to do anything, because this will print a new line. Okay, if for those who have not understood what I did just now, is you can see this. After each line, this is the loop for line, right? So after each line, I should print a new line. So this loop is printing whatever is inside one line. This loop is doing some task inside every line. And when I'm outside this loop, that means here at this place, that means I have already come from the current line and going to the next line. I've already completed what was to be done in the current line, and I am going to the next line. And at this place, I want a new line to be printed. Now, if I execute this code, you can see, let's say 5. Yes, it's correct. It looks like a right angle triangle, right? So I think you got the idea. And whenever you write a pattern program, always try with a big number. That is the essence of a pattern program, right? The pattern looks pretty. Yes. And experiment. It looks great. So that is how you can apply your logic. Whatever I have explained in this video, I want you to follow that. I want you to follow my thinking process. Okay, this code, you will get it everywhere on the internet. It is available on books. It is available. You can copy it from your friends or whatever, but that is not going to do you any good. You just see this video maybe once again, but follow what I said. Follow the steps. Follow the thinking process. That's what I explained here. This video could be of 2 minutes or maybe less, right? It is a very simple code. But what I wanted to explain from this video is to get an insight of how to think, right? I hope this helps you. Maybe see you in the next video. Thank you. Bye.